Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about what is going on in the city of Chicago, because the New York Post just dropped a very lengthy piece about how black gang members in the city have decided that they are going to declare war, or they're on the cusp of declaring war against the Venezuelan gangs. And this is not only due to the fact that they are criminals and they're actually taking territory from the black gangs, but they're also angry about all the different various welfare perks that they're getting. So when there's weird scenario where black gangs, a lot of them which are rooted in defending the black community during Jim Crow, are now angry on behalf of the black community and deciding that they want to strike back because they feel like Brandon Johnson isn't doing a good enough job. It's absolutely insane, and we're going to talk about this. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
America has allowed gangs to enter our country.
The migrants that are coming, they're taking over every block right now.
The city of Chicago is gonna go up in smoke, it's gonna go up in flames.
So to say that the situation in Chicago has gotten intense would be an understatement. In fact, we have shown you video after video of average everyday citizens of the city enraged at the fact that all this money is being appropriated for these migrants rather than going to the various black communities who feel entitled to that money. And to be clear, if you are a black American citizen and you are dependent on government services, while I'm not generally in favor of a lot of those government services, the fact of the matter is you definitely should get them over people who are non-citizens, over people who are committing asylum fraud, and you 100% should get them over people who are members of criminal Venezuelan gangs. This is obvious. I stand with the citizens of the city of Chicago that are outraged by this, but I will point out that these are the same people, in fact, the same exact demographic that voted overwhelmingly for Brandon Johnson when they had another option, when they had an opportunity for change, after they ousted Lori Lightfoot, who is the person who signed that welcoming ordinance under the Trump administration, so that they could stick it to the orange man and say that they're ultra welcoming to these illegal migrants. So this is a position where people are angry about what they voted for, but if that leads to change, the anger, actually getting more than they bargained for, then I'm all here for it. However, what I'm not here for, and I need to make 100% clear, is a gang war between Venezuelan gangs that shouldn't be here and gangs that were already in the city of Chicago, as if they don't have enough crime problems already.
Gangs in Chicago are angry over the influx of migrants and criminals in their city. They say money that should be going to the African-American community on the South Side is instead going to what they call non-citizens, and warn that turf wars between Chicago's gangs and groups like Venezuela's Tren de Aragua could see Chicago, quote, go up in flames.
So while we've heard a lot about the buildings that were taken over in Aurora, Colorado by Venezuelan gangs that, of course, politicians say is happening, they acknowledge that they have police reports of this gang activity going back a year. We also have video of the gangs breaking into apartments, residents that have fled the apartments saying that the gangs have taken over, a maid from the apartment that was actually robbed and forced to turn over keys to the gang members, and all that other stuff. This is also happening in Chicago, and unsurprisingly, they're also denying this is happening in Chicago. But the fact of the matter is, the people who live there, the people who are on the streets, are seeing these Venezuelan gangs grab increasing amounts of territory, and very notably, there was that office building that was occupied by these Venezuelan gangs, as well as a bunch of other various abandoned and non-abandoned buildings.
Photographer Matt McDermott and I traveled to Chicago's South Side to see what was happening for ourselves after we heard about a police report last month that the Tren de Aragua gang had taken over an office building there. We spoke to a number of young, hardcore gang members, as well as gang elders who have retired from the life, and just regular citizens who are very much part of the community. And they're all furious at the estimated $500 million that's reportedly been funneled toward new migrants in Chicago since 2022. And they aren't happy either about what they say are Venezuelan criminal gangs that are leaving the shelters and spilling out into the South Side into abandoned buildings. I spoke to Tyrone Muhammad of Ex-Cons for Trump, who runs a street patrol and violence prevention program. He's gone straight since his days as an enforcer for the Gangster Disciples.
So I wanted to leave this portion of the segment in so you guys can understand the angle or the bias, whatever you want to call it, from this particular perspective, because here you have a guy who is a former gang member. He's a former disciple enforcer, whatever that gang is, I'm not familiar, in Chicago, but he has gone straight. He's actually a part of an organization called Ex-Cons for Trump. So obviously we're in a situation where this guy has decided to take up an alternate political ideology to a lot of people there, but due to the fact that he is a respected gang elder who is able to leave the game, he actually has respect in the community and a pulse on the community. On top of that, he's running one of these violence prevention organizations, and he's talking about the ever-increasing tension in this community. And again, this is somebody who would typically deal not with Latin gangs, because while they do exist and they have existed in Chicago, there are much more black gangs in and around this area, and he's talking about the tension and all this different feedback that he's getting from this community that he's trying to lower the temperature in, and they seem to be really angry and really animated about these Venezuelan migrant gangs.
It is impossible to release gang members and criminals into our country through the borders and broken walls, and then infiltrate them in our community that's already impoverished, that's already broken, that's already disinvested. And when the black gangs, the leadership in the black gangs in Chicago get fed up with the illegalities and the criminal activity of these migrants or non-citizens, the city of Chicago is going to go up in smoke, it's going to go up in flame, and there's going to be nothing that the National Guard or our government can do about it when the bloodshed hit the streets. Blacks against migrants.
Look, there's a lot of truth in what this man is saying, and by the way, we have precedent for it that is often not covered by the mainstream media, and a perfect example of this is the Latinization of the neighborhood of Compton in California. During the period of time where Hispanics started to take over that particular area or certain sections of that particular area, there were a bunch of different various reports of random acts of gang violence against black people that were not necessarily affiliated with gangs. This was done as a mechanism in order to intimidate people who live in this particular neighborhood, and we're already seeing the Venezuelan gangs kind of follow suit in that as they're preparing to go up against the black gangs in order to take over the south side of Chicago. So we're watching this occur in real time, the setup for this, and the gang leaders from these black gangs are ready to go to war with these individuals, and considering the violence of Latin gangs, this does not seem like something that is going to end well, because you already have one of the more violent neighborhoods in this country, definitely among the most violent neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, that is not in a gang war right now, thinking about declaring a gang war. And we can end up in a situation where a bunch of different black gangs end up uniting under a single banner in order to target these Latin gangs. And again, this spells disaster for the south side of Chicago, which, as this person said, is already a struggling neighborhood.
Zach Massey did time in state prison with Tyrone Muhammad, although he's only 27. He's a leader on the streets and said he's disgusted by the money going to Venezuelan migrants at the expense, he says, of the African-American community.
I finally actually talked to him on the translator app, and he told me all the things that he got going on, how they help him get a car, apartment, clothes, link. So it's just like, I just be looking at it like, they ain't got no social security number. Where they come from? He probably not even here legally.
Now look, the New York Post has made it clear that they talked to a lot of different gang members behind the scenes, a lot more hardcore gang members, but obviously the people who are front-facing to the camera seem to come off as nicer than they would actually be. So this guy right here, even though he's reported to be a ranked member of a gang in the south side of Chicago, actually comes off as charming and reasonable, although I would very much want to look into his different various criminal past so we can could see what he was actually serving time for to understand whether or not this guy is as dangerous as he is being sold to us. But again, this is just the front-facing element of the gangs that are talking about what is bubbling beneath the surface. There are obviously more hardcore people in the city of Chicago. A lot of them skew younger, so we could end up in a situation where a bunch of 15-year-olds are shooting at each other, not to mention the fact that we have the switch problem in Chicago that is quite prevalent, where they modify with a small piece of metal from China, Glocks, in order to fire fully automatic. And we talked about the consequences of that before. They're absolutely disastrous, and they could play a key role in the impending gang warfare because nothing is being done to get these migrants out of the country.
They get right here, they get quick housing, quick funding, food. They get cars with no license. They can't even read English and stuff like that. So they get all these perks when they get here, and we still here starving. So what we gonna do about it? Are y'all gonna listen to our cries?
Now again, one of the things that's very striking about these ex-gang members and current gang members is how reasonable the complaints sound right now, even though again, there could be nothing more unreasonable than a gang war declared in the south side of Chicago, as if it isn't violent enough. And of course, I'm not saying that nothing should be done about the Venezuelan gangs, but unfortunately, law enforcement is disempowered in order to act in concert with federal agents in order to deport these individuals. That's what a sanctuary city actually is. And we see all these different crazy laws being proposed or amendments to make the laws more sane being shot down. And it's absurd in every possible way that people don't want to get rid of these criminal migrants.
Corey Rogers was a Blackstone gang member for years. He drove us around the south side and showed us areas where he said Trendo Awagwa and other criminal gangs are setting up shop and what he called showing the flag, which means brandishing their weapons in front of like a housing project.
The migrants that are coming, they're taking over every block right now in this area. Right now, you don't see them because they come out at night. They said they took this courtway over probably about last week. He said it was 100 Venezuelans standing out in the front right here.
Terry, is it an abandoned building? How do they just take it over?
They just, when you take over something, you just stand outside, and that's called showing the flag.
What kind of guns?
Semi-automatics, anything you name, you're gonna see it on the street. These boys got so many big guns that if they're 150 pounds, the gun is bigger than them.
So one of the things that I actually appreciate about Black America is when you interview people, and to be fair, this guy is a reformed gang member. He is no longer a criminal, according to this reporting. They're very blunt and honest about what they're describing. So this guy's throwing out jokes about how these guys are all skinny, but they're carrying big guns that are bigger than them. And he's very straightforward in a way that you would not normally get from your average white person who would be too worried about stepping on eggshells, despite the fact that we're talking about violent gang members from one of the most violent gangs in the world infiltrating major cities in the United States of America. But this guy just tells you like it is. They're taking over this area, that area. If we came here at night, this would be a much more dangerous situation. And it's really unfortunate because it's probably going to lead to escalating violence in the city of Chicago.
I swear.
But they know how to handle it, right? They know what. Tell me about the fact that they're criminals, right? This is a criminal element. These aren't just a bunch of Venezuelans that walked over the border and used to be gardeners back home, right?
Right. And they come from the gangland. They come from rougher gangs than us.
So this is also an absolutely crucial point that people need to understand, and that is the fact that the gangs in Venezuela are much rougher than the ones in the United States of America. And by the way, this guy fully acknowledges that, and the fact is that is one of the reasons why this gang war is going to be so bloody. In fact, I remember I was watching one of those shows, Gangland or something like that, and they were talking about a biker gang that I don't remember the name and I don't want to give the wrong name, that ended up going to war with a cartel-sponsored gang in Los Angeles, and they ended up surrendering in the war very quickly due to the fact that the cartels are significantly more violent than anything this biker gang ever experienced. And for those of you who don't know, there's a lot of ex-US military that are in these particular biker gangs, so these are not soft individuals under any circumstances, but the fact of the matter is they were not used to going to war with 15-year-olds that didn't care about anything, that were willing to kill and act in all manners of depravity, and Tren de Aragua is a gang in that likeness. It's a gang that operates in a very similar way. So again, this would be a very bloody conflict if it were to be initiated, and it could be prevented if the Biden administration, if Kamala Harris, the border czar, would actually do their damn job and throw these people out of the country.
The real issue is that America has allowed gangs to enter our country. Gangs that they would consider terrorist groups that are formed here. We are terrorist groups if we're in a gang. They let terrorists in our country.
Now again, this guy for some reason is yelling at the camera. I don't exactly understand why, but whatever, that seems to be what is happening. And I actually like this description as terrorist organizations rather than as gangs, because in their home countries, these gang members end up taking over so much territory in those nations that they are more effectively described as terrorist organizations. In fact, we talked about El Salvador and how its descent into gang warfare was undone by Nayib Bukele, but the fact of the matter is, those gangs that he ended up putting out of business, that he ended up locking up with this mass incarceration program, did function as terrorists, and they actually did, through violence, extort concessions from the government, and this all culminated with an absolutely horrific attack in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, which is what ultimately ended up leading to Bukele drawing the line with these gang members. And by the way, they committed that attack under the idea that they were concerned that they would not get the concessions that they were previously receiving from the government, according to the reporting. There was no actual strike against them, yet they acted violently and committed a terrorist attack on random people. This was not a gang war. Started dumping bodies into main areas of the capital of El Salvador just to send a message to the president. And by the way, that message totally backfired as Bukele decided to go on this rampage where he decided to lock up most of the gang members. And while a lot of people say that he just sent the criminals to the United States of America, the fact of the matter is that is false. Unlike some of these other countries that have seen decreases in their criminal population while simultaneously seeing decreases in crime because a lot of these people fled to the United States of America, El Salvador has seen a dramatic increase in their prison population because they put their gang members where they belonged, in prison.
The Reverend Corey Brooks also said to me he's disgusted with Democratic policies and said that Black Lives Matter, for example, has never reached out to help him or anyone else trying to improve conditions on the South Side.
Now look, I'm somebody who's not a fan of Black Lives Matter. Obviously, that is true from the length of work that I've done on this channel, but let's be honest, this is meant to be more baiting to the right wing rather than give us the information that we actually want to know. Now, obviously, it is just true that Black Lives Matter doesn't actually care about black people. They only highlight cases where white people are involved, which are unicorns, or white police officers are involved, which are the double unicorn cases. But the regular, ordinary violence that black people inflict on each other, they've never really spoken about. And of course, this potential gang warfare, due to Democratic policies of open borders, they're also not going to address in any serious or meaningful way. So yeah, that has some value, but not particularly in this segment for me. But again, we're getting another perspective, an alternative perspective from the majority perspective in the city of Chicago. But just understand that that fluff is meant to be red meat or bait for you guys.
Chicago is a blue city. Illinois is a blue state. There's no doubt about it that the majority of our neighborhood, they're going to continue to vote Democrat until they wake up. The good news is that there are a lot of people who are responding and waking up and saying, listen, we're not going to take this. We're not going to stand for this. We're going to vote differently.
Look, I'm going to be 100% clear to everybody out there in the audience. I'm not of the belief that Chicago is going to turn red. I'm not of the belief that Illinois is going to turn red. To me, that is not something that is going to happen, although I do expect to see some change in voting patterns for the presidential election. But more importantly and more possible would be for them in the next mayoral election to throw out a left-wing progressive like Brandon Johnson and install a sane person that's actually going to address address the issues of criminality. While we haven't seen this particular city turn red in the past in terms of their mayoral election, it has happened in other parts of the country where people would not expect it to flip from the Democrats. So I do hold out the possibility that if enough people get fed up with this specific issue, if it ends up leading to a potential gang war, we might see some change on the local level. Again, it's not going to be on the national level. It might not ever get on the statewide level in order to get some better policies, at least for a limited period of time. But this, to me, is just a pipe dream. And honestly, the incorporation of Trump, other than to talk about how he differs from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on the border issues and on deporting these people, it's not really all that relevant. It's not really something that's very interesting to me. And of course, if Trump does get into office, if he's actually the president, we'll go back to the period of time where every Democrat at every level runs against the evil orange man. But yeah, the potential for a gang war between black gangs and Venezuelan gangs in the city of Chicago is objectively disastrous. It is something that we need to monitor. It is something that we need to worry about. And we've actually already seen some petty skirmishes between the two that lead me to believe that this is entirely possible. And other cities with other gang cultures are also a ticking time bomb, because whenever you have a new kid on the block, that is going to wreak havoc. And by the way, we might actually see them start to wreak havoc within the Latin gang community before it ends up spilling out to them fighting with the blacks. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a terrifying prospect for the city of Chicago. Till next time.